Right, welcome to AREF's second pub chat. Sadly, yet again, without the pint of long, oh, just need a pint of beer. This time the subject is the future of offices here in the UK. A few introductions. My name is Kevin Aitchison and I'm joined today by Kerry Hunter, Fund Manager at Aberdeen Standard, by Marcus Geddes, who's responsible for Land Security's London portfolio, for David Kaiser, Head of Real Estate UK and Ireland for WeWork, and Lee Elliott, who is the Global Head of Occupier Services at Knight Frank. I should probably say that due to the odd IT glitch, we haven't actually managed to get a picture of Lee, albeit that's probably not a bad thing, but if you hear a voice without lips moving, you will know that is Lee. Right, team, this is very much meant to be a chat, not a question and answer. But really just to sort of kick us off, I suppose, the thing which strikes me at the moment is there's a lot of chat about going back to the office. There's also a lot of chat about the so-called death of offices. Not something I necessarily agree with, but starting on the first of those, getting us back to work, making sure our staff feel safe. What do we as landlords need to do? David, what do you want as an occupier? Actually, I'll start with you, David. Just give us your thoughts on what this is going to entail.
Sure. So obviously our members or tenants, as they're known in the wider market, are sort of a lot more liquid than the conventional market because we have sort of shorter term deals. So I think we really prioritise their needs and our services to them. And the clear feedback we've had is right now health and safety is absolutely paramount. So we've worked very hard on the last couple of months trying to figure out how to get people back into the office. So just to give some examples of what we're doing and currently doing, because people are in our offices, obviously increased sanitation with antibacterial gel, hand-free soap in toilets, etc. De-densification, so putting vinyls on desks and chairs to stop people working there, dealing with co-working areas, making sure one person has one desk assigned all day, removing furniture, encouraging the use of stairs through signage, and also taking out desks from meeting rooms. So we basically halve the previous occupancy in meeting rooms. There's lots of signage, lots of explanation, increased fresh air, anything as detailed as let's just use single-use cutlery, all the touch points being cleaned, reconfiguring seating. And so I think we're doing all that, but then I think you also have to be very careful messaging that to your members and tenants, because I think there's a big psychological barrier to overcome to get people back into the office. So I think your tenants or your members trusting you and you communicating very openly with them. So, for example, we did have some isolated cases of COVID in our buildings before Boris Johnson told us not to go into work. And we were very careful to be very open with the other members of that building to explain what had happened, where it had happened, and what we'd done to deal with them to make them clean. So I think it's really, really important for landlords, co-workers, flex providers to communicate properly with members to give them the confidence to let their employees back into buildings.
Thank you. Kerry, I think you're sort of responsible for quite a few funds from what you were telling me earlier, about 3 or 4 billion. What about from your perspective as a landlord? I mean, a point David didn't mention there at all was engagement between landlord and tenant. Is that good enough, David? We'll come back to you on that one. But how are you seeing things? What are you doing to make sure your buildings are some of your buildings not fit for purpose in terms of coronavirus?
So on our multi-tenanted buildings, our asset managers are working with our managing agents and the facilities managers for the buildings, putting together documents containing guidelines much along the same lines that David's talking about, actually restricting numbers in lifts, enhanced cleaning, that sort of thing, hand gel, etc. Looking at one-way systems, and every building's different, so it's a work in progress at the moment, and we very much will be liaising with our tenants, making sure that they're happy and feel safe going back into the office. So yeah, we sound like we're doing very similar things.
Lee, one for you. I mean, you're very much more focused on the occupier side. How do we make people change from a behavioural point of view, which in the short term surely is what a lot of this is about if we're going to get people back to work?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the primary challenge, of course, is the capacity constraints that are going to be placed on buildings through social distancing. I mean, the reality is that for the foreseeable future, we have office space where, you need a 2-meter distance in between people to respect the social distancing guidelines. So the reality is, occupiers are going to have to reoccupy probably at 50% in conventional space, 50% of their normal footprint. That's a difficult thing to manage, both in terms of physically managing the space, reconfiguring the space, as you say, changing people's behaviour in a very different environment. Things like circulating the building in a particular direction. We've basically driven the office to be in a place for collaboration over the last 10 years, thankfully. Yet we're now in a position where we can't use the office in that way, at least in the short term. So I think there is a behavioural point here. And I think the other point around that reduced capacity, and perhaps something we might return back to, is messaging. David rightly spoke about the messaging to members or tenants, and the engagement between landlord is also a really interesting dynamic here for occupiers in how they play messages back to their staff, those that are being brought back into the office and those that are unable to get back into the office because of the capacity constraint. And I think that potentially could be quite a divisive issue if it's not managed effectively.
Yeah, no, interesting. Marcus, let's move on to you. Very conscious that you guys, probably one of the biggest landowners, property owners in London. Let's look a bit further out, medium term. You guys develop quite a lot. How do you see this changing design, for example? So, are we at a point where we're going to have to start using materials in the same way they do in hospitals, so they're easy to clean, more durable, easier to maintain? Are corridors going to be wider? Are we going to have one-way systems around offices? How do you see that happening long term, medium term, long term probably? But
yeah, I think the key to this is flexibility, and often we talk about flexibility at the moment. We tend to refer to the inclusivity or not of service, but the physical flexibility of a building is absolutely key, and this goes back, I think, to the where the Office of the Future will be able to continue to support businesses in their growth and success. So, for example, having sufficient capacity in your M&E to either have an open plan cellular and highly densely occupied building, or something that is there's more cellular and able to perhaps respond to a different type of working norm. But I think from where we are today, I mean, the conversations we're having with our customers is definitely about getting back to work rather than whether or not the workplace is going to continue to be an important part of the talent retention and attraction package for the future, because provided that the space itself is able to deliver on those sort of key business objectives of collaboration, culture generation, education, and support for colleagues, then I think we're well set for the medium term, provided the quality of building has that inherent base build flexibility that can allow it to adapt to a different type of occupation.
But Marcus, does it worry you that in the future you will develop buildings or have existing buildings which have to be adapted so that you have less lettable floor area and more communal space, for example? And then on the other flip side of that, you're going to get David saying, come on, Marcus, I want to take this space, but I've got to take less space because I need more circulation and one-way routes. We're going to get a bit of to and fro in terms of rental levels.
I mean, as we're all very aware, the design and delivery of buildings happens over a number of years. I would be caution against designing for a quarter 2 2020 sort of COVID environment, bearing in mind that we're already beginning to work through some sort of reoccupation. Yes, social distancing is likely to be with us for the long term, but I think taking the short-term crisis and developing that into ultra long-term themes around how people are going to operate may be a little overreaching, but there's no doubt that that ability to provide plenty of fresh, a very healthy, clean building, a well-managed building, and the flexibility within it to create spaces that can adapt to different working patterns, I think will be a key underpin the building of the future.
There you go, Dave.
I think
Marcus clearly thinks rents are still going to keep flying up, so I'll let you come back at him on that one.
I'll make sure I get recording of this. I was going to say, we're obviously speaking to all of our sort of members, clients, but we've recently spoken to as many of our sort of corporate occupiers as we could. And to Marcus's point, what they've fed back to us is that real estate now is more important to companies than ever. It's sort of top of the agenda, and people are thinking a lot more about how to best use their real estate. And I know that this is a trend that we've seen in the last few years, but real estate went from an expense to how do we add value, how do we attract, retain talent, how do we become more productive? And that conversation is accelerating. I think the other thing, just to sort of your question to Marcus just now, I think it seems like companies aren't just looking now at their real estate as, oh, we are in this building, what purpose will this building serve? They're taking a much more, again, flexible approach and looking city-wide, global-wide. So, you know, we had sort of core and flex as quite a key trend in the market in the last few years. So hub and spoke is now being spoken about quite a bit. So you might have one central head office, but then lots of other local offices or offices on key train stations. So it's not necessarily the layout of your sort of HQ building will change that much. It might be occupied a lot less densely, but you have to have flexibility across a city, across a country to meet employee needs and commute, etc.
So let's have a challenge here then. Who thinks this is going to affect tenant demand? You know, are we entering a probably a short to medium term situation where supply is going to go up, although there's not that much development going on, and tenant demand is going to go down, partly driven by what's going on today, partly driven by the inevitable unemployment we're going to see. So what's going to happen here? And feel free to challenge each other. Kerry, Kerry, go first. Go on.
So I think undoubtedly occupiers are reevaluating how they use space at the moment. You know, we're in the middle of the biggest working from home experiment there's ever been. I think that it's a great opportunity for employers to see what's working well, what's not working so well. But I think that people will also be appreciating the value of an office and what the office brings. There's obviously been quite a move recently towards collaboration, co-working, networking, all that good stuff. And I don't think that's about to be reversed. I think we were already moving towards agile working, and I think that this is, we're going to see an acceleration towards that. I think the notion that everybody should be in the office 9 to 5 days a week is crazy, because everybody's different and everybody works differently. So I do think that employers will be more trusting, because I think that in the main people have shown that actually they're working hard. So yeah, I think we're going to go towards more agile working, but I think that people will occupy buildings differently. Will that mean they need less office space? I mean, I think some big corporates have come out and said that they're going to need less space. I think that seems a bit hasty, to be honest, but yeah, I think it's going to be horses for courses, really, and it depends on the sector you're in, your age profile of your staff. I mean, I think that the younger generations have been finding the working from home more challenging than the older generations, partly because their physical environment is not set up for it. So I think, you know, the people that have been sitting in their bedroom on their beds with their laptops on their knees are probably really hankering to get back into the office, whereas the older generations with a bit of space, a garden, a proper study setup, are finding that it's working quite well. So I don't see a significant drop in demand, but I do think that people will be occupying buildings differently, and we as landlords need to be flexible and be ready to react to that. But of course, as always, we need to wait until the occupiers work out what they want so that we can then deliver for them.
Lee, I think if I could see you, you'd be winking at me now to get my attention. I think you were just going to throw something in there.
No, I mean, I'd agree with all of that. I mean, to my mind, it's not about the quantum. I mean, we can argue about the quantum of demand. I completely agree with Kerry. It's ultimately down to individual circumstance of companies. But I think one thing that we will absolutely see, particularly in the context of hub markets, like central London, is a continued flight to quality. It's not new. We've seen it for a while. And I think the reason for that is we just need to take the blinkers off a little bit. I mean, it's been really fascinating over the last 2 weeks to be thinking about and reading about all these sort of claims about the death of the office, now layered upon with an argument about how we're all going to be working from home in the future. And I think we have a real tendency in real estate to be utterly binary about this issue. And the reality is that where work is going, and it may not happen in the next year, 2 years, it may be a longer term sort of 5-year plus trend, is that we'll have more dispersed workforces that are given the choice. So again, to Kerry's point about what space they use for particular tasks. And as a result, that changes the dynamic for the office, because the line I've been using quite a lot in the last week, sort of with press and clients, is the office becomes a choice, a personal choice, not a professional obligation for the large majority of office workers. And the implications of that for landlords are quite significant, because what it means is you need to create working in partnership increasingly with your customer or your tenant or your occupier. You need to work with them to create not just a good physical and safe environment, to David's point, because I think health and safety will be central to the environment, but also a really strong and compelling experience. I mean, if you look at the London labour market, the average London worker has a 74-minute commute. From the perspective of now the genie of the bottle of working from home is out, okay, and the management resistance of it is perhaps being loosened, and the technological challenges of it are generally being loosened. The consequences of that are you have to make a really compelling case to get people to invest in their commute, both financially and emotionally. And so I think actually the interesting dynamic of this is that we see, certainly for core central London offices, a continued flight to quality, and potentially therefore a little bit of a polarization in the market between poorer quality stock and better quality stock. Much of that better quality stock, incidentally, I think will be delivered in a pre-letting type way with the customer very much at the centre of the decision making to create a solution that's bespoke and appropriate for the business challenges ahead.
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually, because a term that Kerry used earlier was about this being an experiment, and I must admit I've thought of it as a bit of an experiment. If I'm honest, it's an experiment I've probably had enough of now, if I'm speaking honestly. But I do think the work from home, I mean, I'm with you, Lee. I think it's good, and Kerry, it's going to be a hybrid solution, because the concept of permanently working from home brings a lot of challenges. Managing people, how do you make decisions? How are people given autonomy, accountability, feedback? How do you establish and maintain a culture? So I think those things are all quite interesting. But what about you, Marcus? What's your view to life in terms of where we're going?
I don't disagree with anything that we've said, and you could say, well, I would say that, wouldn't I? I don't think the office is dead. I think the purpose of this change, I think my relationship with the office will come out at the end of this change from how I went into it, because what we've proven is that if you have to, you can run a business from a virtual office, which is what we're all doing. But I don't think it quite delivers on all the benefits that were in place when we went into this COVID lockdown that I think still hold true. So, and alongside that, of course, in the case of London, we were looking at I think you mentioned, Kevin, a relatively constrained market anyway. It's not easy developing in London. There's not a lot of spare land. So, the supply dynamic and those sort of historic periods of oversupply that have led to major rent collapses feel like that they've been sort of pushed to one side now. If you look at the sort of the equilibrium of the London markets, they're far more balanced, and if anything in the recent past was skewed towards that pre-letting phenomenon and space that would have been delivered being taken out of the market, and all of it, or generally all of it, very high quality space that sits at the sort of the in demand end. So I think it is It will be a different relationship with individuals with the office, a higher expectation from the end user, I would imagine, to David's point about health and well-being. I mean, this is absolutely critical now. I mean, wellness was already very much in our lexicon as office owners and managers. This is wellness now with a health and safety lens placed on it as well. So, the expectations of the end user will just continue to rise. The flexible approach to how people work, I think, will continue to rise. And like Lee, I see that therefore the onus will be on the developer who wants to succeed to make sure that they're delivering the best quality space that appeals to those new norms or new expectations from the customer and end user.
Yeah, I mean, you touched there on wellness, and of course, the ESG agenda has been growing, and in my view, will continue to grow. And whether this is a catalyst for that to speed up, I think only time will tell. But that does sort of, I suppose, beg the question about existing stock, be it from your point of view, David, as an occupier, or Kerry and Marcus as landlords. What does it mean for existing secondary stock? What is the future? Or are we going to just see the really massive polarization in rental levels and values between prime and secondary? Who wants to take a throw at that? What about for you, David, from WeWork's point of view? How does that work?
I thought you were going to ask me to call on my investment experience there. I mean, we as an ex-lawyer, that's difficult. We've always focused on core London, prime sites as much as possible. So we feel in a very good position of having the best offering for our members to enjoy. I think in terms of stock that isn't as good, grade B stock, and also you think it's highly likely you're going to see a lot of grey space coming back onto the market. It will be more challenging, and you probably will see a divergence of rents. And certainly, I don't have sort of the data in our portfolio because we really don't have any of those sorts of buildings, so it's hard to say. But just to say one thing on the demand question, sorry, and Kerry expressed it much more eloquently than me, but about sort of everything being an experiment right now. But I think it's a very imperfect experiment because we are at home working, but we're doing it for sort of the greater good. And if you look at sort of the way everyone's staying at home to protect the NHS, etc. So everyone is working towards this short-term goal of flattening the curve. And so I think when stuff personally bothers me at home, I think this is for a short period, you'll get through it, and I don't mind it as much. And I just don't think we yet have enough data on how productive people are at home, how happy people are at home. And so I think to call the death of the office, or to say some corporates have said we won't have office space anymore, I think is way too soon for that. Sorry, I know it wasn't your question, just to chip in on that.
I think that's a really, David, Kevin, if I can come in there. I mean, I think it's a really good point that actually, this experiment that we're talking about is actually sort of multi-phased. And the second phase, as we see some people gravitating back towards the office in reoccupancy terms, but others working from home, will probably be a better read of the future direction of travel than the first phase of the experiment, which, as you say, was completely an enforced process of everybody working from home for a greater good. And it's amazing how many people jumped on what was an enforced process as being an effective process, with no real evidence base for that at all. So I'd agree with that. I think the second phase of this experiment, where we start to see that hybrid model to some extent starting to come through, will be a better read of the future direction of travel, probably sort of 2021 onwards. And therefore much more telling for where we're headed.
Yeah, Kerry, as someone, sorry, go on, David.
So I was going to say just on the demand side, because again, I think we see this a lot sooner than conventional space because we have, we're just a lot more liquid than the wider market. But we sort of sat down with our sales team this week, and of course, inquiries dropped significantly over end of March, April. But what we've seen is like a Nike swoosh. So we are now really seeing a steady increase in inquiries. And the expectation on our side is that demand will be as it was, because talk about London, because the fundamentals in London are so strong. But the people will be looking for a different kind of deal. And we've talked about flexibility a lot. So we would expect to see shorter term deals, because in this period of volatility, why are you going to sign a Well, it's going to be more persuading to sign a 10, 15, 20-year deal when you can sign a 6-month, 1-year, 2-year deal. And likewise, CapEx expenditure is going to be very difficult to justify with your CFO. So turnkey spaces, flex spaces is going to be much more appealing than conventional deals, in our opinion.
Yeah. Kerry, as someone who both lives and is based in one of our main regional cities, do you see any differences? And you obviously have a lot of property in the regions as well. Do you see any differences between the regions and London?
In terms of
what's happening in the office space, in terms of differentials between prime and secondary moving forward, the ability to accommodate coronavirus issues, that sort of thing?
Not really. I mean, I think the same principles apply. You touched on ESG and wellness earlier. I think that last year the environmental agenda really gained momentum. Greta did a fantastic job at getting it on everybody's radar, and I think we came into this year. It was pretty clear to me that the environmental agenda was going to be front and centre of everything. Equally, I think that the wellness agenda was growing as well. Both of those things have been pushed to the side. But I think that once we get back to some degree of normality, both of those things are going to come right back onto into people's minds. And to your point about secondary offices, if you think about making spaces safe for people, making them flexible to be able to accommodate different ways of working, making them environmentally friendly and nice places to work from the wellness perspective, it's far easier to do that with a Grade A building or a newly developed building than it is with a secondary office. And so, you know, to Marcus and Lee's point about quality, I do think that you know, tenants are going to be demanding better quality. So I do see a continued polarisation. That said, you know, again, I don't think secondary offices are necessarily going to fall off a cliff. We do still have leases in place, and office tenants in the main are at least honouring their lease obligations and paying their rents. So, you know, I think it's going to be a gradual process, but I do think that secondary offices are going to be very much under the microscope. And whether you're in London or whether you're in the regions, I think the same principles apply, albeit, you know, London is at the forefront of all these trends, and, you know, collaborative working. You know, we work there, you know, you're in most of the big centres now, but, you know, London's at the forefront, but it applies to regional offices too.
Yeah. Marcus, sounds like there's a lot of pressure on you there, you know. Team, we're fast running out of time, so in the few minutes we've got left, I'm going to ask each of you to do a bit of crystal ball gazing and tell me, in the next 10 years, what you think the biggest change to the UK office sector is going to be. Who wants to kick off? Lee, I can't see you, so you can kick off.
Yeah, you can see the look of horror on my face. I mean, firstly, I'd say that I don't think the next decade is, or certainly the next 5 years, is anywhere near as radical as much of the press and wider debate is having at the moment. I think we'll get through the remainder of this year into early next, and we'll start to see a little bit of stabilisation. I think many of the things that we've spoken about on this in this discussion, but I've been sort of researching for the last couple of years about better relationships between landlord and tenant, about flexibility, about the flight to quality. I think they'll all be turbocharged. I think we'll see a slight clawing back from positions that have become quite familiar, such as densification of space. I think the logical consequence of the health and safety piece that we discussed is that I think people, particularly talent that's in short supply, will demand more space. And we'll start to see that erosion of personal space start to reverse out, and that will have an implication for what we build and the depth of demand. But I think most of all, it'll be about real estate being more than a physical product. It'll be much more rounded. It'll be a combination of a well-designed physical product and a softer social experience, you know, with a service layer And I think best-in-class buildings 10 years from now absolutely have that at their core. I think if there's anybody out there sort of just thinking it's about good design and building, good efficient floor plates and then collecting the rent once a quarter, I think they're going to be in for quite a shock in the next decade.
Thank you. Marcus, what about you?
Was there anything left after Lee's contribution there?
Now, come on, let's cheat.
Sorry, I
please.
do go long.
I always love to hear what you've got to say, Lee. And I would focus on the one bit of that you mentioned, which was an accelerated trend. I mean, I think if the London office market is roughly 5 or 6% turned over to the non-traditional element of sort of a fixed income proxy, i.e., it's more flexible and it's higher levels of service. I can see that through not just through a co-working model or through a service office model, but through various product lines that mix those levels of turnkey service overlay that you talked about, Lee. I can see that coming at landlords faster, who will have to, as we all are, and we are certainly adapting to a model of becoming much more operational in the way that we manage our real estate.
Thank you. David, you guys are obviously a massive global occupier. So what would you like to see? Where would you like to see us go?
I think we've always really focused on space as a service and member customer experience. And we've placed the member at sort of the core of everything we've done for the last nearly 10 years since we started. So I hope, and to Marcus' point, that the whole industry continues to do that. And I really think, I agree with Marcus, you've seen a real step change with how landlords interact with their tenants. So I hope that we continue to, and I think now we need to provide something more than physical space. We have to give people a reason to come to the office, and that needs to be experiential. It needs to the office needs to be a more productive, creative environment. So I hope that that's what will happen, and I very much think it will happen. And I think we haven't talked about technology. I think technology and data will be a great enabler of that, and collecting data about why, when, how people use buildings will help inform the industry about how we can use real estate better and also make it sort of more flexible and multi-purpose through design, etc. So that's what I'd like to see, and I think will also happen.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, Kerry. And I think, Kerry, as Marcus said, an answer of everything Lee said would be pretty all-encompassing. But over to you.
Yeah. So I think the key going forward, both in the short term and in the longer term, is flexibility, and that goes for both tenants and for landlords. I think also, as everybody has touched on, landlords and tenants need to be working together much better than we currently are. But timing is often the issue. I think, I would encourage occupiers to be out there looking for offices much earlier than they are, so that landlords can work with them to provide the space that they want. I think that there will be more trust on the back of this working from home experiment. I think that agile working is going to become much more prevalent, with more people working from home, but certainly by no means, the office not being important. I think it will be important, and for that reason, I don't think that there's going to be a requirement for significantly less office space. But I do think, as we've all said, tenants will be demanding better quality, and for that reason, secondary offices will be heavily scrutinised. Just from the landlord's perspective, in developing and refurbishing space, I think we always want to provide space that is as flexible as possible, because we want to be attractive to as wide an audience as possible. But we've got even more reason now to be flexible, and I think we should see now more buildings being developed to shell and floor, or even perhaps shell and core. But that does require tenants and their advisors to have vision, and ideally to be working with landlords earlier in the process.
Brilliant, thank you. I've noticed we've run out of time, so I'll probably get told off, but that just leaves me, Kerry, Marcus, David and Lee, to thank you all for your time. And if I can also thank our sponsors, RSM, for supporting these pub chats. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.